Fallout 4 is not my personal favourite Fallout game, but I sort of think that it might be the best game in the series. It's not the greatest RPG in the series, because there are things it lacks and things it does a bad job at, but generally speaking, it's the most consistently fun, fully featured and fleshed out Fallout experience available today. If you put aside expectations and nostalgia and focus on pure immersion, it is the quintessential Fallout game. And I'm going to do my best to explain why I think that is, and without any major spoilers too. First though, I think it's sensible to establish what Fallout really means, or what it represents in the context of this argument. I know that the Fallout brand is important to people for a lot of different reasons. For me personally, I love the series for its dark humour, colourful characters, and that faulty mid-century optimism for the future, which manifests not only in the aesthetics of every location and object in the game, but also in a lot of the storytelling too. What makes Fallout special to me is not actually the apocalypse bit, but the unique state of the alternate history world which came before, because ultimately that is what sets it apart from any number of other post-apocalyptic universes. I'm pretty sure those things are important to Bethesda too, but I also think they're deeply invested in the patriotic Americana aspect of the universe, and also in the distinct technology, and probably above all, in making the player part of rebuilding the new world. I know there are some who are so loyal to the original turn-based games that they don't even consider Bethesda's efforts to be real Fallout games at all. I would agree that there's a fundamental difference in the tone of those early games compared to the newer ones, and if they're your favourites, then that's fine. But whether you like it or not, Bethesda have well and truly made the Fallout brand their own by now. These days, Bethesda is a part of Fallout's DNA as much as its original creators are. And going forward, stories will be defined by their specific vision for this universe. I believe most of the core world building from those original games is still present in Fallout 4, but it's clear that Bethesda have shaped or reinvented aspects of the world to make them their own, and, I think, to create a more cohesive vision for the franchise. For so much of the Fallout brand's life, large parts of the universe have been compromised or non-existent, owing either to technical limitations or time constraints when making the games. I think you only have to look at a basic weapon in the game like the assault rifle to see how Bethesda have evolved the design into something that is uniquely Fallout. And I think they approached almost everything in Fallout 4 this way. There's a very good reason that Amazon Prime's Fallout TV show has basically pulled all of its art direction direct from Fallout 4. It's because basically all of it is just already perfect for this world. Any iteration beyond it, without needing to serve a specific purpose, would be completely pointless. The same is actually true of Fallout 76, which adds new things but doesn't fundamentally change any of the art direction, gameplay or tone from Fallout 4. I would never want to dismiss anyone's love for any of the earlier games, but you can't deny that the world is the most fully realised here in Fallout 4. And while I understand people having a preference for the style and tone of the earlier games, I believe Bethesda delivered the most consistent and creative version of the Fallout story in Fallout 4. So let's get into the details. Like many others, my favourite main story in a Fallout game would easily be New Vegas. For what it's worth, that would be my favourite game overall too. I'll probably end up talking about New Vegas in a future video. Regardless though, when ranking the main stories, Fallout 4 is definitely not at the bottom of my list. It's maybe third or possibly even tied for second. Either way, I did like it well enough, and I definitely preferred it to Fallout 3. That game, for me, feels like it spends too long meandering and then eventually ramps up in a way which doesn't feel consistent with the rest of the gameplay experience. I still love the game though. Vault 112 and all of the Tranquility Lane stuff is probably my favourite moment in any Fallout game. Ultimately though, I think a game's ending is critical to how we perceive the overall story, and in Fallout 3 it's hugely anticlimactic. Fallout 4, on the other hand, feels like it has a consistently exciting and engaging story from beginning to end. There's plenty of intrigue and mystery, twists and turns, and I like the role that the various factions play as part of it. I understand it doesn't branch as much as people might like, but it feels more dynamic than Fallout 3, at least to me. More importantly though, it gives you the option to focus on one faction or choose to mostly ignore another. And it feels like there's a very real and momentous conflict at the centre of it all. Maybe they're not all the best Fallout factions ever, but the Railroad, the Institute, the Minutemen and the Brotherhood all have distinct motivations and identities, which make them interesting options for the player to side with. I actually think that, maybe aside from the Minutemen, all of these factions have varying degrees of morally questionable aspects too. They're all at least imperfect. I also really like how, throughout all of this conflict, Diamond City and various other settlements are essentially just impartial wastelanders. But as the story progresses, it starts to impact their lives in subtle but noticeable ways. Really, without spoiling anything, Fallout 4's story is about choosing how and with what faction you want to rebuild the wasteland. Bethesda's Fallout is, at heart, about surviving and rebuilding in the wasteland, and I think that story plays out in its best possible form here in Fallout 4. I'll mention too that I really think the opening section of Fallout 4 is brilliant. I think it does such a good job of priming newcomers on the basics of this universe. Where Fallout 3 focuses first on the vaults and New Vegas just sort of assumes you'll pick it up as you go along, Fallout 4 goes to great lengths to set up not just this story, but the whole franchise in general. It tells you everything you need to know in a really spectacular, cinematic way. I understand as a returning player why New Vegas' prologue is probably more appealing, and there'll be many who tell you from a game design perspective that it's better to throw the player into normal gameplay as soon as possible. But showing you everything you have to lose in Sanctuary Hills, and then blowing it all up, makes that step out moment and that walk back home very impactful. Also, I remember wishing that I could have spent far more time in that idyllic pre-war world, because even though it's not a quick prologue, you're not actually there that long before you're rushed off to the vault. I appreciate one of the key issues people have with Fallout 4's setup is that it forces a backstory on you by making you have a family at the beginning. For what it's worth, Fallout 3 basically does this too, but in both cases, I don't think it's putting the player in a box in the way that people seem to suggest. Thing is, with the possible exception of New Vegas, where you've already been living in the wasteland a while before the game starts, Fallout games are always about what you become in the wasteland, not what you were before. Usually you're just a vault dweller, but when you're thrown out into post-apocalyptia, on whatever quest, you have to become a survivor. When you suffer a tragedy at the beginning of Fallout 4, and are forced into the new world, you are essentially starting from nothing. Which is, to me, the quintessential Fallout experience, except that only in this game do you have a frame of reference for the pre-war world, and not just the vault. Aside from the main story, Fallout 4 has a ton of interesting side quests. For the sake of this discussion, I'm also considering Nuka World and Far Harbor as part of the overall Fallout 4 package, since anyone who hasn't picked up those two expansions is missing out on some great content. Plus, they've been out for a long time now and are sold pretty cheaply as part of an overall package. Both of these DLCs are great for different reasons. I think we can all agree that Far Harbor has some of the best questing that Bethesda has ever done. And I think Nuka World is a really cool setting where the unique twist is that you can be a lot more evil than in the base game, if that's something that interests you. And I'm sure it must for many people, because not having many evil options in the base game is the complaint I've probably heard the most often. It seems to me that when limiting their dialogue options, Bethesda swapped the evil stuff for more mean-spirited, sarcastic and selfish options, which I personally think is more fun and interesting as someone who struggles to do anything particularly evil in a game, but I do understand the complaint. I mention those two DLCs first because I think they have some of the most interesting and unique quests in the whole game, but honestly the base game has plenty of fantastic side quests too. The Cabot family comes to mind, as does the USS Constitution, the Silver Shroud, and Captain Zhao. I'd hate to go into too much detail and spoil these quests for anyone who hasn't had a chance to play them yet, but suffice it to say that this game has way more great quests than people give it credit for. And that's not even mentioning the variety of side quests available from specific factions and companions. The Fallout universe is full of fantastic characters, and Fallout 4 has plenty of them. I don't want to say they're the best in the series, but there's very few wasted spots here, and most of them are pretty memorable, especially the companions. To start with, Nick Valentine is supremely cool. He's like having a robot Humphrey Bogart following you around at all times. Inarguably, he's one of Fallout's best companions. Piper is generally fun to have around, though I'd understand if you found her the teensiest bit irritating. Either way though, I don't think you can deny that she's a character. Kate has always been one of my favourite companions in the game. She's hardened to the wasteland in all the right ways, and it's nice to hear an Irish accent in the Commonwealth too. Paladin Danse is, if nothing else, extremely Brotherhood of Steel, and if that's something you're into, then he's a winner. Curie has an interesting quest, and Hancock's got a nice hat, and so does MacReady and Preston Garvey. And obviously, if you're a fan of helping settlements in need, then Preston Garvey is going to be your guy. There's more than that even, and I don't think any of them are terrible. And of course they all have their own individual likes and dislikes. The silliest thing about the companion system, obviously, is that certain actions in-game will make companions fall in love with you, even if everything else you do is utterly detestable to them. You could be the worst person in the world to Piper, and stand against everything that she believes in, but so long as you then go on and pick 50 locks, she will want to marry you. The great thing with companions though, is that they're one of the things which will most greatly impact the kind of playthrough you have. You could swap constantly between companions, but it's more fun to stick with one or two, and in doing so help define the choices you make in the game. If I have Nick by my side, I'm playing the detached detective. If I'm with Danse, then I'm a Brotherhood member. And with Piper as a companion, I'm a person with a slightly irritating journalist following them around. In my opinion, the companions in Fallout 4 offer some of the best role-playing in the game. Obviously, there's plenty of other characters here too though, and they all play their part in building out the wasteland in an interesting way. In general, I find the Brotherhood of Steel to be a bit too much, but if you like them, then they're here in full force. The Railroads members are all basically as you'd expect, and the Institute has some clever people talking about clever things. And then there are all the other weirdos you can encounter in the wasteland, and they're a big part of what makes the world so interesting. Fallout 4's Boston feels like the most detail-dense and gameplay-rich map in the series. Fallout 76's map might be bigger, but large sections of it are still empty or uninteresting, even after several years of updates. New Vegas might have more dense and interesting individual locations, but that game's truncated production schedule left a lot of areas low on detail or requiring more attention. In Fallout 4, every location feels like it has inherent value to the gameplay loop. You can basically walk in any direction on the map and find something interesting. And while that was nothing new for Bethesda or Fallout games, the reason I think it's at its best here are twofold. It's the details and the options. On the details side, I'll refer back to my earlier example of the assault rifle. Everything in Fallout 4 has had a dramatic makeover from previous games, such that it all feels like it was designed from the ground up to be part of this world, rather than something which has sort of been shoved in a half-assed way. Take a look at the Nuka-Cola bottles or their vending machines for another example, or basically any other object in this world. And of course this translates to the buildings too. In previous Fallout games there are plenty of distinctive retro-futuristic buildings, but there's also a lot more of what I'd call vanilla wasteland, by which I mean a wasteland that could have come from basically any apocalypse. In Fallout 4, far more of the world is distinctively mid-century retro-futuristic, and that just makes exploring it a lot more interesting. On the options side, I think Fallout 4 adds so much new stuff to the world to empower the player. When exploring, there's obviously loot and there's encounters and quests like in previous games, but it doesn't stop there. One of the great downsides of Fallout 3 and New Vegas for me is that I never really felt like I had a great base of operations. Sure, there were housing options, but they weren't that great or particularly easily accessible. This is arguably the thing that Fallout 76 does best, because of how well fleshed out the camp system is. But even then, your settlements will feel relatively lifeless compared to Fallout 4. For starters, having limited locations where you can build in Fallout 4 is actually sort of great for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it means you're building in more interesting environments, like a drive-in cinema, where in Fallout 76 you can basically only use empty land. And secondly, because it means those locations are designed to have abundant materials which you can easily collect to build your settlement. Even if you just put in the minimum effort into this area of the game and put down a bed and some workbenches, it's still great to have an easy fast travel point where you can send followers, dump your junk, or build and adjust weapons and armor. And simply being able to build and modify weapons and armor to begin with is great here too. You can also farm crops if you want to, or go save your other settlements. And you have a lot more interesting options with power armor and irradiated areas in Fallout 4 too. All of these features just fit so well with the Fallout universe and are implemented in a great way too. All of these features just fit with the Fallout universe and are implemented so well that it creates a much more interesting world and more interesting gameplay as a result. I appreciate there were a lot of changes made to Fallout's core gameplay loop, which didn't and still don't sit well with a lot of players, but I think that most of the changes were overall for the better. Fallout 4 massively improves the gunplay from previous games, and overall just makes the whole experience feel a lot more fluid. Making VATS slow motion instead of freezing the game was an excellent choice too, because it keeps the fun of that system while not hurting the pace of combat like it did before. Fallout 76 benefits from the gunplay improvements in Fallout 4, but it also loses slow-mo VATS and it's just not as fun in real time. Outside of combat, there's the numerous crafting and modification systems which I've already mentioned, most of which feel great to use in-game. Of course, there's the good old Pip-Boy menu here too, which is still a little bit cumbersome, but is the best it's ever felt in a Fallout game. Maybe 76 has a slight edge here because of improvements to sorting items, but it's not a big difference. Then there's the dialogue system, which I appreciate has always been somewhat controversial. Obviously, the biggest issue here is that it limits your options too much in situations where you could be having a variety of speech checks. Realistically, most of those speech checks would still loop back to the same dialogue, but I still think that RPG flavour is important. Still, what this dialogue system does do well is streamline the whole experience. It means you're spending less time pondering your options and more time actually listening to the dialogue. Plus, I think that having fewer options means that in this case, Bethesda have at least made the effort to make those options more distinct from one another, in most cases anyway. The options are definitely better when they're a bit more descriptive, but when you have the voice protagonist, I wouldn't personally want to read the whole line and then hear it said back to me verbatim anyway, because that would get boring quick. So it has its faults, but I don't think it's inherently bad, and once you get used to it, I think it's quite a fun system to engage with. The way dialogue is implemented also gives the game a much more cinematic feel compared to other Bethesda games, which I personally like here, but it's okay if you don't. For newbies to the franchise though, I do think it's better. Overall, I don't think you lose many options from previous Fallout games, but you do gain a lot of new systems, and I think that's a worthwhile trade-off. For example, I think that making all of the junk in the world inherently valuable for crafting and modification of settlements, armor, and weapons is a brilliant decision. It doesn't just work as a gameplay mechanic, but it feels inherently rooted in the world. As in, it makes sense that you would be scrounging together parts to build a new weapon in the wasteland. It means the game gives you a reason to explore and collect more junk too. On top of that, most all of the ingredients just make sense in the objects you find them. If I need more adhesive to build a scope, then obviously glue or duct tape will sort me out. It's great that Fallout's junk is not only visually improved here, but finally means something. Many players at launch mourned the loss of the skills and perks system from previous games, as Bethesda greatly simplified the leveling process by linking everything back to the special stats in Fallout 4. I think this was a fantastic change though, and I don't think it fundamentally changes the type of characters you can build anyway. It's just that those skills are folded into more broad categories. It seems to me that it's less off-putting for newcomers, but still essentially achieves the same result as previous systems. Obviously you lose some great perks here as a result, but I also think it means there are less filler perks too. I fully appreciate that Fallout 4 is less of an RPG than Skyrim, Fallout 3, or even Starfield in several ways. But overall, given how much they do to iterate on things and add new systems, I think it results in a tighter gameplay experience. In the end, looking at these Fallout games, I'm personally less interested in which has the best individual quests or RPG systems, and more with the overall sense of immersion, and on that front I think Fallout 4 wins out. If I could suggest just one game to a newcomer that would convince them how great the world of Fallout is, it would have to be Fallout 4. While we can each have our own opinions on what works and what doesn't in this and all the other games, I think it's hard to deny that Fallout 4 is the most complete and cohesive experience. Fallout 3 is brilliant, and obviously I adore New Vegas. Fallout 1's story is top tier, and Fallout 2 is a lot of fun too. And Fallout 76 is fine. It's okay. It has its moments. As much as I love these other Fallout games, I can see that in comparison with Fallout 4, they all lack something. At the end of the day, I think that Fallout 4 is the least compromised Fallout game, and in that sense, the best of the bunch. It simply is the definitive modern Fallout experience. That doesn't mean it has to be your favourite though, because it's not mine either. Thanks for watching this video, and feel free to subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk about more video game stuff. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.